Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a really fascinating topic today. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder why we're attracted to the people we're attracted to? I mean, we love to think that modern romance is all about destiny, or shared interests, or maybe just finding someone with a really great sense of humor. But what if I told you that beneath all those modern romantic ideas, our love lives are actually being secretly driven by ancient biological puzzles? Puzzles that our ancestors had to solve thousands of years ago just to survive. Way back in 1890, the pioneering psychologist William James asked this wonderfully poetic and honestly super relatable question. He asked, "Why does a particular maiden turn our wits so upside down?" It's a great question, right? Why do we absolutely lose our minds over specific traits? Well, the surprising reasons why men buy wildly expensive engagement rings, or even why certain waitresses tend to get higher tips, they actually lie deep, deep in our evolutionary past. Today, we're going to unpack the hidden biology of attraction.
So let's start with section 1. Why do men marry? The evolutionary benefits of commitment.
Think about this from a purely biological, ancestral perspective for a second. Why on earth would a man commit to just one woman when it might seem like a better evolutionary strategy to just spread his genes as widely as possible? Well, the data actually identifies 9 distinct evolutionary benefits for ancestral men who chose commitment. First off, by committing to marriage, a man seriously increased his odds of attracting a more desirable mate, mainly because women required reliable signs of commitment. Marriage also dramatically increased his paternity certainty, meaning he could be confident the kids he was raising were actually his. It boosted his children's survival rates because he was around to protect and teach them. And get this, the data shows that marriage actually increases a man's own lifespan. Literally, men who commit live longer. So commitment wasn't just some cultural rule, it was a huge evolutionary advantage. Which brings us to section 2, the hidden fertility problem. This is basically an ancestral detective story. To actually get those benefits of marriage, ancestral men had to solve a really complex puzzle. To fully grasp this, we have to compare ourselves to our closest primate relatives. Take chimpanzees, for example. They feature what's known as advertised estrus. When a female chimp is fertile, everybody knows. It is super obvious. There are clear physical changes like red, swollen areas, and mating happens only during that very specific fertile window. But humans, we feature concealed ovulation. There are 0 blindingly obvious physical changes when a woman releases an egg, and sexual activity happens all throughout the cycle. Because ovulation was completely hidden, human males were forced to evolve some incredibly complex psychological tricks to figure out which women could actually bear children. To understand how they solved this, we need to quickly separate 2 scientific terms that get mixed up all the time. Reproductive value is the average expected future reproduction of a person at a certain age. Fertility, on the other hand, is actual current reproductive performance. Let me give you a quick example to visualize this. A 17-year-old has higher reproductive value simply because she has her entire reproductive future ahead of her. But a 25-year-old, she's actually more fertile right now because women in their mid-20s tend to produce the most viable children. Notice the typical reproductive value curve for women right here. See how it peaks right up there in the late teens and then just shows a steady decline, essentially hitting 0 by age 50. Now, ancestral men couldn't just look at a woman, magically guess her exact age, or use an X-ray to see her internal fertility. They couldn't do that, so they had to rely on observable, physical cues that perfectly matched up with this curve. This explains exactly why youth became such a massive, universal indicator of reproductive capacity over the course of human evolution. All right, moving right along to section 3, universal cues of beauty. And spoiler alert, it's biology, not just culture. This leads to a truly fascinating realization. The whole logic behind how standards of attractiveness evolved totally challenges our modern assumption that beauty is just made up by society. Instead, it frames beauty as a purely biological solution to that hidden fertility problem we were just talking about. Ancestral men used physical traits, things they could clearly see with their own eyes, as a proxy for the fertility they couldn't see. So in a very real way, beauty is quite literally in the adaptations of the beholder. So what exactly are those universal cues? Well, the data shows a really powerful cross-cultural consensus. We're talking about features like clear skin, facial symmetry, a low waist-to-hip ratio, and a feminine, higher-pitched voice. These are universally seen as attractive across the globe because they are biological billboards for youth and health. And here is an absolutely mind-blowing fact from the research. Infants as young as 2 months old already gaze longer at universally attractive faces. No cultural training required at all. These standards are wired in almost immediately from birth. And these biological adaptations, they get incredibly specific. Just look at the optimal lumbar curvature. Women face a massive biomechanical challenge that men simply never have to deal with, a 9-month pregnancy that totally shifts their center of gravity forward. Research shows that men actually evolved to find a very specific wedge-shaped lower back curve attractive. Why? Because that exact curvature perfectly minimizes spinal strain and torque during pregnancy. It's just a brilliant example of evolutionary problem solving shaping what we visually find beautiful. Because these physical cues are so absolutely vital for reproduction, men put a massive premium on them. Looking at the data on the desire for physical attractiveness in a long-term mate, literally across diverse cultures from Bulgaria to Nigeria to the US, there is an invariant cross-cultural sex difference. The green bars, representing men, clearly show that everywhere in the world, men place a significantly higher premium on physical appearance in a mate than women do.
Now for Section 4, Solving Paternity Uncertainty, the Quest for Fidelity. But listen, finding a fertile mate was really only half the battle. Because ovulation was completely hidden, ancestral men faced a devastating biological risk that most other primates don't. The risk of investing a lifetime of hard-earned resources into raising another man's child. To solve this, men sought out behavioral cues to guarantee their paternity. Across all kinds of global populations, ancestral men sought premarital chastity and postmarital fidelity. It was basically a biological insurance policy. Now, it's worth noting that while men still value these traits more than women cross-culturally today, modern birth control and women's economic independence are rapidly shifting these values. Still, that underlying evolutionary drive for fidelity is a remarkably powerful force. Section 5, Preferences Shaping Actual Behavior. From brain circuits to real life. It's one thing to talk about ancient brain circuits in theory, but do these old preferences actually shape how we behave walking around today? Absolutely they do. Studies show that waitresses who are younger and have certain physical traits measurably receive higher tips. No joke. And when it comes to buying engagement rings, men using their own money spend significantly more if their bride-to-be is younger. Even in casual conversation, men will subconsciously lower their vocal pitch, which is an indicator of masculinity, when they think they're talking to a highly attractive woman. These ancient circuits are very much alive and kicking today. Now, here is a statistic that might completely surprise you. 21%. That is exactly how much a man's testosterone drops when he enters a committed romantic relationship. Building on that testosterone drop, check out the relationship between hormone levels and relationship status here. Unpaired men have the highest levels by far, while fathers have the absolute lowest. And looking through the evolutionary lens, this makes perfect sense. Testosterone fuels mating effort and competition. If a man kept those levels sky high, he'd be constantly distracted pursuing other women. So once he successfully commits to a mate and becomes a father, his testosterone naturally plummets so he can pair bond and focus his energy on parenting. Finally, Section 6, Ancient Brains, Modern World, Hijacking the Circuitry. We've seen how our biology perfectly adapted for ancestral survival. But what exactly happens when you drop those ancient brains into the 21st century? Psychologists call it the contrast effect. Think about it. Over evolutionary history, an ancestral man might have encountered maybe a few dozen women in his entire small tribe. Today, we are bombarded every single day by thousands of curated, artificially enhanced, photoshopped images on our phones and billboards. Research shows that viewing these totally unrealistic images artificially inflates men's standards. And worse, it actually decreases their reported commitment and satisfaction with their real-life partners. Our ancient mechanisms are literally being hijacked by an artificially saturated environment. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to wrap up with today. If our ancient mating psychology evolved for tight-knit, small tribes of maybe 150 people, how are our modern relationships going to survive in a world that constantly hijacks those biological circuits? It really makes you pause and question how your own daily behaviors, your desires, and even your relationship satisfaction might secretly be steered by the evolutionary ghosts of our past. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a whole new perspective on the hidden biology of attraction.